All right, everybody, welcome to episode number 2 of the Label Wiener Show. I just want to start by saying, if you are watching this, first of all, I'm honored, I'm humbled, and if you watched my first episode, I want to say thank you so much. Again, very honored, very humbled to all those who tuned in. I appreciate it very, very much. With that being said, I want to jump into this on episode number 2. I'm not sure I'm going to have like a very long 50 or 55 minute episode here. Primarily, we have Thanksgiving happening tomorrow. It's Wednesday, November 22nd. Planning on dropping this either tonight or tomorrow night for that matter. But I do want to discuss the hostage deal, which just came out. Also, in addition to that, I was in Israel. I was at the Kibbutzim, specifically Be'eri and Kfar Aza. I was in Sderot. Visited a whole bunch of soldiers, a whole bunch of different army bases. So I do plan to try to get to that, give a quick synopsis of what I experienced and what my, how that went, what my experiences were while I was in Israel. I think I was there for a total of literally 75 hours. I landed on Sunday at 7 p.m. I left on Wednesday night at 10 p.m. That was definitely a pretty big doozy of a 3 days, packed with stuff that honestly I will never forget. But I do want to get right into the current hostage deal. I have been asked by a bunch of people what my thoughts were on it, so it definitely got me thinking. And I'm obviously very tuned in to what is going on. Just for the record, if you're wondering, this podcast is not a long-term idea of just discussing Israel and the conflict that is going on, the current war that's going on. But obviously, given what is happening, it's definitely a priority right now to discuss current events and what is happening on a day-to-day. So let's get into the hostage deal and what I currently think. For those that are not familiar with the hostage deal, I'm going to give you the quick basics, and that is as follows. 50 Israeli women and children being released back to Israel, 150 Palestinian women and children being released back to Gaza, the Palestinians. I assume some of those potentially are from the West Bank. Well, I'm not 100% sure. Among some other things, those are obviously the crux part of the deals. I think some other factors were Israel not having any surveillance for 6 hours a day from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. During it's a 4-day truce. So for 4 days, Israel will not be able, and the U.S. for that matter, will not be able to have any surveillance across Gaza. And Israel will be giving a lot of aid, letting in a lot of aid and giving a lot of aid to Gaza civilians, clearly significantly more than what's happened in the last 47 days. So those are the basic terms of the deal. And obviously, a lot of people have asked me what I thought about the deal. But before we get into exactly what I thought about it, I happen to hate the idea that I'm reading in the news and I'm hearing that, there's 150 women and children being released back to the Palestinians. And right away, they got me thinking, like, what? Israel's holding women and children? What does that mean? Because I do have an innate faith in Jews, forget about the Israeli government, within Jews, that we do not capture and behead babies, and that we do not take children as hostages who have done nothing wrong. Well, it turns out, as all the media outlets now are reporting, that these are actually majority comprised of male adults who are between the ages of 16 and 18, who were involved in either supporting terrorist groups, involved with terrorist groups, all sorts of different, hostilities towards, the Israeli army, whether it be throwing rocks. 2 of them are actually attempted murder that Israel is agreeing to give back, which is pretty crazy. But with that being said, I didn't like the wording of it, and it's come out now that it's, much more based on, these are really 16 to 18-year-olds. And again, I understand the 18-year-olds are the official classified term of an adult. But obviously there's such a thing as juveniles being people that need to be put away. I think that goes without saying. And obviously in the U.S. we have plenty of those. So that's just an important point that I think very much needs to be brought out, because the media at the end of the day ultimately is what really drives the world. That's just the facts. The media is what drives the world. And the media reporting just simply that women and children are being released from Israeli prisons, I just think that that's very detrimental to Israel and people's belief in Israel's innate goodness. So as far as the actual hostage deal, let's just get right into that. So there's 3 reasons why I am particularly not happy with the deal that was made, okay? I just want to preface one important thing, and that is that at the end of the day, this is a very, very difficult conversation to have, and I could understand anyone sort of to a degree arguing with my opinion. To a degree, I could hear why someone would argue, and that's because who am I and who is anyone for that matter to judge anyone's life? We believe in Judaism that one person's life is worth the entire world. So it's very, very difficult to give an opinion on the most basic concept. Should one human being die for the sake of, thousands or hundreds of thousands of people living? I mean, that's, a very, very difficult thing to ascertain. Even that question would be easy to ascertain, meaning most people would be easy to understand how that's a difficult thing to comprehend. But I think much more people would understand how, if it was one person, let's just call it, a lot of people would see it more like, okay, well, there's 100,000 people who are going to live, let's just call it, and there's one person who's going to die. It's easier for the human mind to comprehend why maybe we should let that, let's call it, one person die. Now, with that being said, that doesn't change the actual facts of the question. One person dying is a significant thing, and I don't know who has the ability to actually make that call. I definitely don't. But I'm going to look at this to the best of my ability with my brain to give my personal opinion. Again, if someone argues, I hear it. It's a complex question, one that no one should ever be in. Unfortunately, we are in that situation. Now, when I was in Israel, during the 3 days that I mentioned, one of the things that I did was I visited the hostage's family. I particularly met with the granddaughter of a hostage, a woman who's 85 years old. I believe she's one of them. There are, to be exact, 29 people. I'm sorry, there are 3 people that are over the age that are all 85 years old. They're not over 85, they are 85. Okay, and this woman's grandmother was one of them. I believe it was Yafa Adar, right? That's this woman's grandmother who I met. And, to clarify, this particular initiative was an advocacy group that was created the day after October 7th, or within the few days after October 7th, an advocacy group for the hostages, and their families. Now, this was in a building which was actually about 4 stories. There was a businessman who basically ceases the operations of his company in the building and gave the whole moved his operations of his business to somewhere else and gave the whole building over to this advocacy group that was put together so that the entire building could be used and all the rooms and resources of this building could be used to free these to advocate on behalf of these hostages, hopefully to give them the freedom that they obviously deserve. And this is a company. This wasn't a thing, PR aspect of it, marketing, just different departments, one department after the next. It was actually an extremely, extremely impressive operation. And with that being said, the head of this entire operation did come into the room, and there were about total, there were 15 people in my group, and then there happened to be another group of about 15 people that came into the conference room. There were about 30 of us there, and the owner, the head of this operation basically said that he feels and that he believes that the hostages are the number one priority. Now, I'm going to say this on the record. I know people are not going to like to hear this, definitely some people. Some may even find it callous. I hope you could understand that I'm a good person, and I'm a very sensitive person, and I don't mean to be callous, but I do not believe, unfortunately, that the hostages are the priority. I think they're extremely important. Obviously, that goes without saying. They're my brothers, they're my sisters. But if you're looking at this from an objective standpoint, in my opinion, the thing that is the priority is the state of Israel, the well-being and safety of the entire Jewish people as a whole. There are 8 million people that live in Israel. There are 7 million other Jews in the world, a large majority, obviously, in New York and in America. And the well-being of the state of Israel, the citizens in Israel, and the ability for all the other people that live outside of Israel to be able to actually have a homeland, to be able to come back to, if God forbid anything happened to us outside of Israel, is, to me, the priority. And I can understand 100% how that's very, very difficult for people to comprehend. But to me, when I'm looking at it, that is the facts of the situation. So there are 3 reasons at the end of the day, though, why I do not agree and do not love, I should say. Forget about agree. Agree is the wrong word. I don't love this particular ceasefire. The 3 reasons are as follows. I'll go by them one by one. Number 1, as everyone knows, I'm not a novice by any means for saying this, but you do not negotiate with terrorists. Negotiating with terrorists, as everyone knows, typically the only thing it does is leads to those actions happening again and again. There's a reason the term exists. Kind of like the idea that nothing good happens after 1 a.m. It's just that type of idea. We know what happens. We know what happens when we negotiate with terrorists. Here we go, round 2. For anyone that is not fully aware, the Gilad Shalit release, which we clearly negotiated with terrorists. We negotiated with them. We gave up 1,000 Palestinian prisoners. This is the craziest thing of all. 1,000 Palestinian prisoners for 1 Israeli soldier. First of all, that should tell you everything about how much we value life. Everything. one of our citizens were captured, we gave up 1,000 people for that one person. That is the Jewish nation, and that is how much we care about every single Jewish soul. Now, with that being said, I don't know if people are aware, but the top two people in this entire operation of October 7th, specifically, Yahya Sinwar, okay, who was undisputedly the second in control of Hamas and the number one person who perpetrated and planned this particular mastermind of October 7th, was Yahya Sinwar. The number one is Ismail Haniyeh, who resides in Qatar, which is its own discussion. I mentioned it briefly before, the Qatar being the one negotiating this while letting the literal actual head of Hamas live there, who is worth $4 billion, is flabbergasting. And the fact that the U.S. government is not pressuring them to stop harboring Hamas genocidal terrorists and the actual head of them is astounding, but it is what it is. And I'm not here to get into that particular point. But Yahya Sinwar, the head of this in Gaza, who's currently in Gaza, number two in the entire organization, was released in the Gilad Shalit deal. He was actually released, and many verified people that participated in this particular massacre of October 7th were released in the Gilad Shalit deal. Because you know what happens when you release terrorists and you negotiate with terrorists? They do it again. That's not like a rocket science concept. So that's the number one reason, the most basic reason why you do not do deals with terrorists. No matter what, like really no matter what, you don't do deals with terrorists because they're freaking terrorists. They're evil people. They don't act in good faith. They're not good human beings who want the well-being of other good human beings. They're terrible human beings that started what they started for a reason, and negotiating with them just allows them to do it again and ensures that they will do it again, because they are now seeing that taking hostages does in fact cripple the government, the Israeli government, and does in fact get them what they want. And repeating that again and allowing them to see that will only make it that they will do it again. That's the most basic fundamental reason. I don't think anyone has to be a genius and need me to tell them that for that reason. Number two of the reason why I don't like this deal, okay? And this is honestly the most important reason when it comes down to it. Doing this deal ultimately at the end of the day legitimizes Hamas. It makes, before Hamas released any hostages before today, right? When there were still 240 hostages in Gaza, okay? Babies, elderly, mothers, fathers, children, okay? All civilians, literally innocent civilians, forgetting about soldiers. Already with 240 hostages in Gaza, which is horrific and unthinkable to go and do such an act, okay? The entire world was already thinking and pushing aggressively for a ceasefire, and Israel has aggressively been pushing back and has only not been forced to do that because the U.S. government, thank God, has a brain and can understand what evil is versus good is. That is the only reason why they have not had to stop their military operation. But the pressure has been intense and been significant, and it has been worrisome to pretty much everyone that Israel will not be able to accomplish what they need to accomplish, which is the elimination of Hamas. The release of any hostages at the end of the day, the only thing it does is legitimize Hamas and puts more pressure on Israel and legitimizes the fact that Hamas is able to be negotiated with, and that Hamas is doing their part. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it will stop and prevent Israel from doing the thing that they need to do, which is the only objective, ultimately at the end of the day, that matters. There's one most important objective at the end of the day, and that is eliminating Hamas and ridding the world of their evil. That is the only thing at the end of the day that matters. The world will be a better place when they are gone, both for Israelis, both for Palestinians, for the entire world, by the way, and for America. Okay, everyone will benefit from their evil being eradicated from the world. They're not freedom fighters. They're not resistance fighters. They're evil people. That's all they are. Everything else is a mask and a smokescreen for what they actually are. And doing this deal at the end of the day, giving up 50 hostages and Hamas being willing to do that and making the deal of 50 to 150 and the particular deal that's going on only legitimizes who they are, only increases the pressure from the international world for Israel ultimately to stop their operation. I want to give everyone an understanding and a way to think about this, just to understand what it means to give up 50 hostages and why this is a poor thing. After this, God willing, it seems like it's happening, so 100% God willing, it's Jewish people. After God willing, this deal goes through, okay, which will ultimately, at the end of the day, increase international pressure against Israel. It's so crazy, right? It's so amazing. Hamas is giving up 50 hostages. There are still 190 freaking hostages in Gaza. 190 hostages still in Gaza. after they've given up 50. We're in the exact same position, ultimately, at the end of the day, that we were in. There's 50 Jewish souls being saved, 100%, but it legitimizes Hamas as someone being willing to do a deal. It legitimizes the international community to push for a long-lasting, full ceasefire. And we still have 190 hostages in Gaza. I want to tell you all something that I fully believe. The question really comes down to one very important thing. If Hamas told Israel, we will give you all 240 hostages back, but you need to give a full ceasefire, what is the response? Well, I'll be honest. As an Orthodox Jew, the real response is, I can't answer the question because I'm a religious Jew, and I would leave that up to a rabbinic person who understands these things, understands the concept of freeing slaves, which is a huge, huge concept in Orthodox Jewry, specifically Pidyon Shavuyim. It's a specific concept, and that is way above my pay grade from a rabbinic source. So I just want to clarify that. With that being said, what I do want to say, if you're asking me, as someone, if I wasn't religious, if I was a Christian, if I was not an Orthodox Jew, and I didn't believe that particular hierarchy and the wisdom that those people have, I would 100% say, you do not make that deal. That deal means that Israel has to give a full ceasefire, and that deal also means that more Israelis ultimately die. That's what it means. It means Hamas stays in power, this evil stays in power, and guess what? They will be firing rockets within 36 months, and guess what? Within 10 years, they will commit another October 7th. That means we live with another evil group of people who the only thing they want is the eradication of Israel and the eradication of all Jews throughout the world. We're living now still with those people. You cannot live with a group of people that just committed what happened on October 7th for two reasons. Number one, the security of the state of Israel. Number two, the morale of the state of Israel. And actually a third reason, and that is ultimately at the end of the day, that evil must be removed from the world so the entire world sees if such evil is ever perpetrated, there will be a consequence. The idea that such evil can be perpetrated and there is no consequence to face other than a bunch of buildings being destroyed, but that particular evil gets to exist is a terrible, terrible, terrible lesson for the entire world. The idea of giving up ultimately on a full eradication and doing a full ceasefire is a win no matter what for Hamas. Yahya Sinwar living, Hamas still existing, is a full victory for Hamas. I don't care if you eradicate every single building in the entire Gaza. Hamas still being the governing party and telling all the 2.3 million Palestinians of what to do and rebuilding Gaza and having another, they wouldn't rebuild Gaza, honestly, they just build more tunnels. But having Hamas, a terrorist organization, which is the same thing as ISIS, still living there and being able to effectively get away with what they did is a loss for the Israeli army, is a loss for the Israeli government, is a loss for the Israeli people. It is something that cannot be tolerated. And that's why ultimately at the end of the day, my belief is that has to be, every decision that is made has to be made with that objective. So at the end of the day, I know people don't like this and it's difficult to say. It is. It's difficult for me to say. It's very hard. Again, if this was my family member, 100%, I would never make this statement. I'd be way too biased to make this statement. It's my father, my mother, my sibling, my sister, my brother, even my cousin. I would never be able to make this statement. I can't ever fathom for even 1 second the pain that every one of these families has gone through the last 47 days. I can't fathom for 1 second what each hostage is going through. I will never, God willing, never ever have the ability to fathom that, and no one should ever have to, ever be in that, experience and in that place. Of course, it goes without saying, but I still believe my stance that if you're looking at this from a full picture, the ultimate objective, bottom line ultimate objective has to be the eradication of Hamas, which will ultimately lead to the long-lasting safety of the Jewish people and all the future Israelis that straight up will die. There will be more than 200. This is really what it comes down to. There will be more than 240 Israelis to die, without a question, if Hamas stays in power. Not even a question at any point if Hamas rebuilds their tunnels, rebuilds their infrastructure, and stays the governing party, aside from the loss of the Israeli army, the loss of the morale, the win for the Palestinian people in their mind, believing that they could do this again. There will 100% be another attack within the next 10 years, and there will 100% be another 240 people that will die within the ensuing years. And that is something that cannot be tolerated. Number three, for the reason why I don't like this hostage deal, and that's part of what I just said, is because obviously this gives Hamas the 4 days to restructure what's going on. It stops the Israeli army from keeping up the pressure. Hamas is now able to regroup, have a bunch of, meetings with each other and, huddles, as they would say. And ultimately, the Israeli pressure is the one thing that is very much working out right now. I think there's no one who disagrees that the Israeli army expected more losses at this point than they have. Obviously, 70 losses as of today, November 22nd, is terrible. Every Jewish life, as I said before, matters. Can't fathom even losing one Israeli soldier. But the predictions of going in there on the ground were way, way worse. Way worse. And the Israeli army has pretty much done whatever the hell they wanted, and they have put Hamas 100% on the defensive end. And stopping that, what is the risk to the Israeli operation? First of all, in their effort to defeat Hamas and eliminate them, but also, most importantly, for this particular third point, what is the result as far as more Israeli soldiers being killed because Hamas has the ability to now regroup? Now, obviously, no one will know that exact number. It's not the point. The point is, it's likely it will be some, right? There's no arguing that. They have the ability to regroup. They're going to figure out what they want to do. It's 4 days. They're not being bombed. They're not being targeted. Everything's a standstill. They can walk freely, figure out what they want to do freely without a problem, all meet up, all talk, and figure out what they're... So it's obviously highly likely that more Israeli soldiers will get killed by the laws of nature. With that being said, also another factor why I don't love this ceasefire is because, again, Israel's committing to put in a ton of aid. How you trust what's coming and what's not coming in. I guess if you say that I don't know the details. If Israel's the one, giving all the aid and knows every single bit of stuff that's coming in, fine. But Israel's also giving a ton of fuel. What they're gonna, they're saying obviously Israel, since they're the ones giving the fuel, are gonna prevent it, in theory, from going to Hamas. But again, how could you ever trust this idea of giving any reliance and trust onto Hamas? It's anyone with a brain understands you cannot trust them for 1 second. These people are evil people who are terrorists. That's what they are. They are terrorists. To be able to believe for 1 second that anything they say will be done within the purview of humanity, will be done within the purview of doing the right thing, will be done within the purview of civilization and with protecting human beings and civilians and doing the correct thing, is you are a total fucking moron. There's no better way to say it. So ultimately, like I said, I think it's clear at this point that yes, I am not fully for the ceasefire. Again, at the end of the day, they're doing it. Hopefully it'll work out. But, it's definitely very complex. And I think already there's a lot of arguments on whether or not it was the correct move to make. All right, everybody, want to take a quick second to give a big shout out to our sponsor for this episode, CubX. CubX is an IT company that personally does my own IT. I've also recommended these guys to at least 7 close friends of mine that have very successful companies. They have all come back to me and said things that these guys are second to none. This is not a company that when you call them, you have to wait on hold for 25 minutes. This is not a company when you get through to someone that doesn't know exactly what they're doing. These guys are top notch. You call them, you get through in 60 seconds. You can get right back to work. For me, that's the number one thing. When I have a technology issue, I don't want to be waiting on hold. I want the problem fixed immediately. These guys are incredible. Specifically, they operate and focus on people with small businesses, 5 employees or more. They also have companies that are on staff for 500 plus employees. They're very, very big in the healthcare industry. If you want to reach out to them, you can hit them at 732-444-8771. Press 2 to speak to someone in the sales department. You can also email them at hello@cubx.com. That's hello@cubx.com. Or you could check them up on cubx.com. That's cubx.com. Again, my personal endorsement, wouldn't give it. I'm an impatient motherfucker, as everyone here knows. If these guys weren't the best, I wouldn't be recommending them. Give them a call if you are not happy with your current IT company or started a company and need a great IT company. These guys are the people. All right, back to our episode now. Just to give you an idea, by the way, for everyone who's thinking about this ceasefire and what's going on, I want to read the stats of the people that are in captivity, okay? There are 39 children under the age of 18 years old, okay, who are being held captive by Hamas. There are clearly at least 20-something, I don't know the exact number, but there are 20-plus babies and kids under the age of 10 years old, okay? This whole idea and every part of this argument that you hear that I've been listening to the last 3-4 weeks is that there's oppression and there's a resistance going on and therefore it's justified. Let me be clear on one thing. I don't care what any single human being says. Any human being that says there was any justification for the atrocities that were committed on October 7th is a person who has zero moral compass. It does not make a difference how oppressed you are. It does not make a difference if someone's even trying to kill you, okay? The act of the barbarism and the sadism, okay, and directly the terror inflicted on civilians is never, ever, ever justified. If the Jews walked into Germany after 1945 and did what Hamas just did to the Jews, okay, and beheaded babies, killed children in front of their parents, were sadists in the way that they chose to kill those kids and those civilians, it would 100% be the wrong thing to do. In fact, the Jewish people have never ever done that for a reason, because they're not freaking terrorists. That's the reason why they have never ever done it, because they're not terrorists. There is a difference between evil and good. Okay, so this idea that there's a resistance, and that resistance justifies October 7th, and that resistance justifies taking babies at 8 months old, okay, taking people that are 85 years old, taking 29 people over the age of 65 years old is a load of bullshit. There is no person that should be able to ever say that taking civilian hostages in general is okay, and most definitely not taking babies. Most definitely not taking 85-year-olds and 29 people that are over the age of 65. That is never ever justified. It wouldn't be justified in any war at any time, anywhere since the creation of the world. Ever. This is not a resistance. This is terrorism. Anyone that can't understand that has a totally skewed moral compass, is most likely an anti-Semite. If this was going on in any other world with any other country, they would 100% denounce this on the highest level. They would be outraged. Outraged that Russia can go take 20 babies under the age of 18 from Ukraine, that they could go take 29 people over the age of 65 years old, that they could go kidnap 200 civilians. They would be outraged if Russia did that. They'd be outraged if Ukraine did that. If Ukraine went and took 200 Russian hostages, they would be equally as outraged. How could you walk into Russia, despite the fact that Russia went and invaded your country and is killing your civilians? How do you have the right to walk into another country and take civilians, even if you're the one who's attacked, and take babies hostage and take 85-year-olds hostage? No one would ever stand for that. You don't ever have the right, ever, Ukraine, to ever walk into Russia, okay, and murder children and cut off their limbs and cut off babies' heads and burn them alive, ever. There would never be a justification for that. In fact, the Israeli army has never ever done that, ever. And this idea that the Israelis I hear this all the time. I'm listening. The Israeli army is a genocidal army. Do you know the definition of genocide? Hamas in their charter literally says they want to kill every Jew. They want to destroy the entire state of Israel and kill every single Jew. This has nothing to do with land. This is not a land-based dispute. This is not, let's do a two-state solution. Hamas doesn't want a two-state solution. They want to kill every single Jew. It's in their charter. If Israel wanted to kill every Palestinian, and for the people calling them a genocidal state, you know what they would have done? They would have killed every fucking Palestinian by now. That's literally what they would have done. They could do it. They could do it tomorrow. They could have done it the last 50 years. They haven't done it because Israel doesn't care to kill Palestinians. It's not what they're interested in doing. In fact, they're very much happy with no terrorism, living side by side in peace. But the idea, this idea that it's a resistance and there's some even small capacity of truth to this shows you anyone who says that, it shows you everything about their moral compass. Everything. There would never be a time in the history of civilization where it is ever be okay, ever, to commit the atrocities that Hamas committed. Fighting oppression looks like killing soldiers. It looks like terrorism which you could argue wouldn't be terrorism, but going after the opposing army. That's what it would be. And that is not what's happening. That's not what in Hamas's charter. The facts do not say that in any capacity that this is a resistance. So, you're hearing so much, BS. I listen to a lot of pro-Palestinian people and pro-Hamas people just because I like to see both sides of the argument. In life in general, you can't be scared to see the other side of things, and I'm very big on that. So the CNN, MSNBC, you name it, the whole 9 yards. I'm on YouTube. I'm looking up, watching everything. And I think so much about this also, what it comes down to, is a big piece of like the facts about this situation. You could turn on one YouTube video and hear a debate, and there's a set of facts, or not even hear a debate, like hear history from like a documentary and hear a set of facts, and then turn on literally a different video, right, in the same hour about the facts and hear totally different facts. It's almost to the degree that I don't even know where to go and what's true. One thing I know is true, regardless. Nothing justifies October 7th. It literally does not make a difference. Nothing justifies terrorism. Nothing justifies going onto a bus and blowing up civilians. It does not make a difference what you think about who started, who didn't start, etc., etc. There is nothing that will ever justify purposely killing without any focus on killing any actual opponent that's within the justification of war, just randomly killing civilians, ever. Blowing up the number 2 bus in Israel in 2002 by the Sbarro bus bombing or the Sbarro restaurant bombing, with no soldiers in there, there's nothing justified about that. There's no way to justify that. Whenever you tell someone, do you condemn Hamas for October 7th, and the person doesn't want to condemn Hamas, or even if they do, the response typically is, this didn't start on October 7th. That's always the response. You know when this started to them? 75 years ago, this started. And the amount of people, at the end of the day, what is really happening, it's one side at the end of the day gaslighting another. And like, almost like, since no one knows the facts, and most people don't actually have the facts, and there's no inarguable facts of what is happening, meaning at this moment in time, there's no argument on the facts of Russia invading Ukraine. Zero. Literally zero. But I'll tell you something. In 75 years, there very much can be arguments on the facts, because as time goes by, people like to bring up, random obscure facts and make those as if those were the priority of the issue and what actually took place on the ground as the most important things. And because of that, then push the entire narrative into a different place, turning it from the person who's oppressed to being the oppressor. That's effectively what happens. So while Israelis and Jews are saying, you guys are the ones oppressing us, look what you did on October 7th, the Arabs are saying, you oppressed us, and therefore we're just responding. It's a question of really who's gaslighting who. And the idea that there is no actual understanding of the facts, and there's no one factual-based agreement between people, or at least an overarching understanding of the facts, because whenever you say that, even if you say the UN gave Israel the right to state, and the Arabs, at the end of the day, have had 7 peace agreements that were offered to them, they denied all, you know what they just respond? They respond to a very simple thing. Oh, well, you came in 1880 and the 1900s and the 1915s, in 1915 and the 1920s, and you came and you stole our land. We were living here, you took it. Well, first of all, is that even true? There were Palestinian Jews there the whole time. Does anyone know how many Palestinian Jews, how many not? When does the right to a land start? Okay, so you guys were there, let's just say, in 1800. Great. Well, we were there for 3,000 years, going back 3,000 years, for hundreds of years at a time. We were driven out, so why don't we have the right to the land? And just because you were living there in 1880, therefore when you're coming back, therefore you're in our land. That's effectively the entire argument. What happened during the British Mandate? What are the facts of the situation within the British Mandate? There was no Palestine. Palestine, actually, for anyone that has a fucking brain in their head, is derived from the word Philistine. Philistine is in the Old Testament. That's literally where it's from. It was created by the Romans to dig it into the Jews when they pushed the Jews out. That's literally where the word Palestine comes from. So this idea that, we have the rights to land, well, there was no Palestine. There was never a state. It was ruled by the Ottoman Empire. There was literally nothing. There were Arabs living there at the time. What, therefore, gave you the right to the state? And they'll say, well, we had it in 1400 BC. That's literally, it's a literal question of who started what, when did it start. We can all agree that if life started on October 7th, everyone would 100% agree. I think in the entire world, actually. I even think people that are anti-Semites would have no choice, but just to simply say, well, they started it, Israel's responding, Israel's defending itself. But no, the response always is, no, October 7th is not really where it started. It started before that. For the last 20 years, you've had an open-air prison on us. You stopped us from doing this. Well, the Israeli response to that is, we offered you a state 7 times. Well, you're trafficking terrorism, blah, blah, blah. It just goes on and on. The Arabs say, well, you're right, but before that, in 1981, you did. It's a limitless, timeless argument of who started. That's really what it comes down to and whose right it is. So, again, October 7th is never, ever justified. I don't think people understand that simple concept. And anyone that can't condemn that is crazy. And if you want to start with, where did this start? Well, FYI, everyone agrees the Jewish people had the start to Israel before anyone. That's not a question. And the idea that, oh, that was 3,000 years ago, that doesn't mean anything. There were 2 temples within Israel 3,000 years ago and over the last, 3,000 years. Jews have been there the whole time. So you had a majority of people in 1400 and therefore the conflict starts at 1400 or at whatever point. That's not arguable. Jews were definitely the first people within Jerusalem. Undebatable. So that's, at the end of the day, what this comes down to is just a back and forth argument of the gaslighting of who started what, and wherever the argument starts, the next person that did something is the wrong person. But that's how every argument goes, right? It's like if someone punches you in the face and you punch whatever and you punch them back or whatever, defend yourself. I'd still probably tell someone to try to control themselves. But if you did punch them back, the obvious answer would be, well, why did you punch them? Right? What are you doing? You started. Well, if the person who punched them at first said, well, he punched me 1 minute before, well, all of a sudden that person is not anymore the person who started. The other person's the person who started. And that's effectively this entire argument. I hear so many different back and forths, but the more I listen to this argument and I read everything and hear everything, this is really what it comes down to. It's an argument of who started this whole thing from 1,000 fucking years ago. But you know something? You're never going to get down to the answer of that argument. That's really what this comes down to. And this would be, at least to me, since you're not going to ever get to the bottom of this argument in a way that at least that either side can hear it, the answer is what is going on the ground right now and what needs to be done. And the answer to that is, in my opinion, if the Palestinians stopped throwing fucking terror attacks, this would stop. They would have more credibility for a 2-state solution. They would have more credibility within the Israeli government to not be a danger to the people of Israel. That's what they would have. There's 2 million Israeli, I said this on the last time, there's 2 million Israeli Arabs that live in Israel. Israel's not scared of Arabs. They're literally not. There are literally 2 million of them living there out of 8 million. They're scared of terrorism. That's what they're scared of. And they want to keep it a Jewish state because that's the whole concept of the state of Israel. So yes, if there's a majority of Arabs, that would absolutely take away the basic fundamentals of the concept of a Jewish state. But the idea of them wanting to kill Palestinians, not there at all. They would be actually fine with a 2-state solution, so long as they did not feel threatened that the Palestinians will come to wipe them off the face of the earth. And I think with Bibi specifically, Bibi does not trust. If there's one thing Bibi has right, with everyone giving their opinion, blah, blah, blah on Bibi. And this is to me where the right understands this and the left simply does not. Bibi understands that the Arabs want to wipe, at the end of the day, the face of the Jewish people off the earth. That's what they want. Part of this is because he has a religious aspect to him, which I think is true, and I think is accurate, honestly. Part of it is because he's been around. They ultimately want to wipe the state of Israel off the face of the earth. And he does not trust them that they will act in good faith. And because of that, he does not want ultimately a 2-state solution. He doesn't want it. Everyone's saying, oh, Bibi doesn't really want a 2-state solution. Yeah, you're right, he doesn't. He tried it, FYI, in 1996 to 2000 when he was the prime minister. He tried it. And Arafat went and committed one terrorist attack after the next, after Bibi and his government offered a significant amount of the West Bank and a good deal to Arafat. Arafat went and did not counter and went and blew up buses and committed terror attacks. So I think in Bibi's gut, he's like, they don't want peace. They're full of BS. So even if we gave them the West Bank, we're going to give them air rights. We're going to have them have planes with an airport right next to our land. Like, what are you, fucking crazy? The whole land it takes a few minutes to get from the West Bank to the Mediterranean Sea by an airplane. We're going to get people that want to kill all the Jews and wipe the state of Israel off the face of the earth that just committed October 7th. A state and a airport with military equipment. Fuck no is what he's thinking. We're never doing that. I'm reading, you hear this also. What a great term. It sounds so sexy. It's packaged so well. It sounds so beautiful. An open air prison. Gaza's an open air prison. You know why it's an open air prison? In 2005, when the Israeli army disengaged, okay, it wasn't an open air prison. Gazans were able to walk into Israel and go to the West Bank. Do you know when the open air prison started? Does anyone know? 2007. What happened in 2007? Or better yet, what happened in 2006? Hamas won an election and went and murdered everyone from Fatah, which is the Palestinian Authority. They murdered all of their opponents that are Arabs. That's what they did. Okay? And they're a terrorist group, and Israel knows that. And in their charter, they have committed to killing every Jew, and that is their stated intention. So yes, Israel in 2007 decided we don't trust these people to be sending other people through our land into the West Bank, which is literally going across Israel. That's such a crazy thing. That's crazy that they don't want a literal, clear genocidal group that has stated it as clearly as day in their charter. It's there to come into their land and cross through it. You know why? Because look at fucking October 7th. Look what happened. So this idea that there's an open-air prison, there's a reason why there's an open-air prison, or that term. There is a reason. And FYI, if there's really an open-air prison, Israel would not give them anything. They wouldn't give them fuel. They wouldn't give them water. They wouldn't give them, which Israel supplies a ton of. And then you have another question of why is Israel still the one supplying them? Possibly because of the fact that every single bit of aid and equipment and technology and piping that they have used to make missiles and create tunnels and shoot rockets into Israel, to random areas of Israel, with no ability to guide them and no ability to shoot them at any single source of military-based infrastructure. They just shoot them the fuck in. Whatever happens, happens. Oh, it lands on a civilian? Oh, who cares? That's the definition of terrorism. That is actually the definition. So this idea that like an open-air prison, you hear it, you keep on hearing it. You know who else is contributing, by the way, to the open-air prison? A nation by the name of Egypt. You know what they are? They're Arabs. They're not Jews. In case you didn't know that and you're watching this. But you never ever hear that Egypt is the one also responsible for the open-air prison. You know what you hear? You hear like Egypt has imposed strict rules on their borders. That's what they've done. They've imposed strict rules on their borders. Israel's the one responsible for the entire open-air prison. Israel has not imposed strict rules on their borders. Egypt, though, has imposed strict rules on their borders and is not involved at all in the open-air prison concept. You know why Egypt has imposed strict rules on their border, but also obviously is not involved in the open-air prison? Because they don't want terrorists coming into their country. They don't want that. That is not a yummy thing for them. They're not particularly obsessed with terrorists walking in to their country. So this is just the basic idea that no one is questioning that Israel's blockade and Israel's open-air prison, their subjugation towards Gaza, is because of a very basic, normal, reasonable, understandable, rational thing of Hamas. It was imposed in 2007. It wasn't there since 2005. It happened 2 years later because Hamas won the election, murdered everyone, and has a particular genocidal intent towards Israel, which they state very clearly in their charter. And Israel does not want them roaming through Israel towards the West Bank. No one likes to say that that's the reason and specifically point out that that maybe is a good reason of why they are doing it. No one likes to say very clearly that Egypt is imposing as strict restrictions on their border as Israel is. No one wants to say that. It's an Israeli problem, this open-air prison. It has nothing to do with Egypt. It's the double standard is fascinating. It's beyond comprehension. Really, really beyond comprehension. And you know, a huge capacity to this whole thing also is again, you hear this. I was thinking over, again, watching all this stuff. You hear that Israel, you know, fine, they killed 1,200 civilians, but Israel now killed X amount of civilians. And I've heard like a lot of different answers to that. Obviously, the basic answer, many have said as well, defending yourself and, you know, going after terrorists who are standing in front of civilians and civilians dying is radically different than particularly going after civilians and brutalizing civilians, which is obviously true, meaning with no intent to even kill Israeli soldiers. Just, you know, that obviously is very much true. But to me, I think all you really need to look at and what's really, really clear is there is a significant difference between bombing a building with a Hamas terrorist in it and acts of atrocities and real sadism and real brutality and real medieval practices. Is there a difference between shooting someone and cutting off their head? I think we would all agree there is, right? There's a difference, right? One is barbaric, sadist, shows a part of your soul. The other one is a person got shot. We can all recognize that there is a difference. If you don't think there's a difference between cutting someone's head off with a knife while they are alive versus shooting someone when they're not even realizing or they're in a firefight with you, if you can't recognize that, then you need to see a psychiatrist immediately, okay? There's a difference between bombing in a response to an attack, of which Hamas did, to bombing a building and children getting killed, just walking in to a house and chopping a girl's arm off, and chopping a baby's head off, and stopping a car by blowing out its tires, putting petrol over it, and lighting it on fire, to the degree that the car has to be buried because there are no actual human remains left. And in Jewish burial, that is what we do. There's a difference between beating a child to death with a hammer and dropping a bomb on a building which has a terrorist inside it. Oh, well, you'll say, well, there are civilians there. Fine. You want to argue that point? That's not the point. There's a tremendous point. There is an evil within certain atrocities that are significantly worse than others. Medieval practices, heavy barbarism, and sadism is significantly worse than a war where you're trying to protect yourself and civilians are dying. The idea that civilians die because you're in a war, it's not good. No one ever wants civilians to die. The idea that I have to stress this is ridiculous. But there could be people that end up watching this that their brains can't comprehend it. No one wants civilians to die. But the idea and the argument, there are more civilians that died on Palestinian side and less civilians that died on the Israeli side, so it must be Israel's bad, is a totally stupid argument. It holds no actual intellectual basis. The idea that there are civilians that are dying when Hamas people are around them, okay, and are dying by a total mistake and not on purpose. And that's a different argument we could have, whether or not those people even believe that. Part of the problem is they think Israel is doing it on purpose. That's their own issue, because they're not. But the idea that there's no difference between targeting the civilians dying in the process of a war, okay, with terrorists getting killed, versus targeting directly civilians, and the barbarism that came with that. If you can't understand it, like I said, you need to see a psychiatrist. It says something about your soul. It says something about who you are. When you could kill a 7-year-old boy with a hammer. I was in Israel last week for 72 hours. I spoke directly to the organization Zaka, who recovered all the bodies and is burying all the bodies. The stories they said are so horrific, the imagination cannot believe. One of them, that there was a child beaten to death with a hammer. Okay? The idea that you could compare that in any capacity with going after the people that started and did that and attacked you. And then there are civilians that are killed in the process because there are 10 civilians that die when they're holed up in a freaking building. It's not the same thing. I understand you want to make it the same thing because more died. You're an idiot. That's really the answer. It's not the same thing. And this war would never be happening. There would be no civilians dying in Gaza. There would be no Palestinians dying. Literally 0 Palestinians dying right now in Gaza if this war wasn't started. It's that straightforward. It wouldn't be happening. Everything was fine before October 7th. I was in Israel, October 6th. There were no Palestinians dying in Gaza. 0. That's all you need to know. If they didn't attack on October 7th, there would be no civilians dying. So this is some of this, the moral, again, I said it briefly last time, some of the moral confusion over this is astounding. And ultimately, at the end of the day, there's one objective and one objective only that needs to happen, not just for the state of Israel, but for the sake of the world. And that is the elimination and the eradication of Hamas. And that is the number one priority. Above all, this is not using emotion. This is using logic. Negotiating with them, working with them, legitimizing them, having the international world come against Israel and putting even more pressure on Israel to the degree where they're forced to stop their military offensive, gives the opportunity for Hamas to stay around. And that is a loss of the war, a loss of humanity. That is puts the entire world at risk. And most importantly, if I may add, gives the opening and the pathway for this to happen again. This could happen again. Don't kid yourself. They literally even said they want it to happen again and again. It gives the pathway for it to happen again. It needs to be clear what happens when someone does this in any state, in any country, anywhere. And if any country has the capacity to do this and has the military equipment to erase another group of people and another government of people that goes and does what they did on October 7th and brutalizes human beings, what they did, should 100% do it. It will always be good for the entire world. If it happens in Russia, Ukraine, Africa, Australia, it doesn't make a difference where it happens. Just like we eradicated ISIS in the Middle East, in Yemen and other areas they were, and it wasn't a question, it was good for the world. Eradicating Hamas is good for the world. But going back to what I said before, ultimately at the end of the day, what it comes down to is, again, I believe, is that the Arabs don't believe. They don't believe that Israel has the right to a state. They don't. In their minds, they were there first. Any state that Israel gets is pushing them away from their homeland that they were in to start. And it doesn't make a difference. Even the UN resolution doesn't make a difference to them. The Nakba happened in their minds. That's it. It was their land. It was taken away from them. And this idea that a two-state solution could exist, it's, in my opinion, a totally false concept and notion, I should say specifically. And people that are thinking that, in my opinion, are extremely naive. They're naive. But peace has been offered many times by Israel. Opportunities were very much on the table. They've never taken any of them. I want to very quickly, for a couple minutes, just talk about very quickly what I experienced when I was in Israel. I was there for, like I said earlier in the podcast, I was there for 75 hours. Packed days. 3 days of just absolutely packed. I just want to thank the people that made this happen, if they're watching. Really was honored, lucky to be on that trip. That's the truth. I didn't even think I was going to go. Someone invited me, bam, landed up there, one day to the next. And I think what struck me for the most, we went to the Kibbutzim that day. That was day number 2, out of the 3rd day. I think the thing that struck me the most, particularly, by the time I got there already, Zach had been there obviously for 4 or 5 weeks. And most of the real egregious atrocities and the real egregious horror had been for the most part cleaned up. But I was in Be'eri and I was in Kfar Aza, two of the places that some of the most heinous crimes were committed in the history of civilization, honestly. And the state of those kibbutzim, those towns, 95% for sure of the homes were burnt through. Just a total destruction. No other way to say it, total destruction. And I remember walking through the houses, and the thing that hit me was you walk through these houses, and the first one I opened up a dishwasher. I should say it was open already. Cups, dishes, forks, knives. On the next house that you walk into, the house is upside down, but you walk into the bedroom, to the baby's bedroom. Bed is upside down, but the drawers are open. You see the baby's pajamas neatly packed in there. You see the diapers in there. You see their clothing. You see towels in the cupboards. You walk into the next room. The master bedroom. Room is upside down again. But you see a pair of flip-flops neatly against the wall, right next to the bed. And the point is very simple that I'm making. You could only imagine the terror that these people faced when they went to sleep the night before. And they expected to get up and put their feet right into those flip-flops. Like we all do every morning. We go to bed in the flip-flops. We keep them right next to our bed. At least I do this. And get up in the morning and put their feet right inside them. You could see how the baby's pajamas were there. The onesie was there for them to be pulled out of their crib and their bed and be put inside it. You could see how the towels were in the dressers, ready to be used the next morning for a morning shower or a morning bath. And what went through my brain was one simple thing. These were people that were alive that experienced the worst terror in the entire world. That's what it was. They were regular people like me and you who went to sleep one night thinking everything would be the exact same way the next day as it was the previous X amount of years since the day that they were born. And they woke up the next morning to violent terrorists who raped them, who killed them, who murdered anyone that was with them or took their kids hostage. And that terror could not be possibly fathomed by any human being. And walking through those houses and seeing the humanity within all those people and seeing that they were just so much regular people, that was the most powerful lesson of my entire trip. It was surreal. And I think going to those 2 kibbutzim was worth every single part of my trip. Because it made it so real. Each house, this group of people are hostages. They're in Gaza right now. 2 parents, 3 kids. They're in Gaza. Next house, parents, 2 kids. Parents are killed, 2 kids. One of them is killed. One of them is in Gaza. Next house, the entire family has been killed. And all these houses, the same exact thing as I just stated. You could tell it's a regular home. It's chaotic, but a regular home. So, an extremely powerful trip. And that's definitely my most important takeaway. I was on the army base with soldiers. We did a barbecue for them. At the end of the day, the state of Israel right now, the Jewish people, they're one of a kind. I was there. They are so bonded together. Yes, there's posters every block you walk of the 240 hostages, but the strength and the absolute, unmitigated, unwavering commitment towards each other and love that has been built towards each other, regardless to religious, not religious, is beyond impressive. And that's the Jewish people. I said it last podcast, that's the Jewish people. You would think they'd be battered. You'd think they'd be broken. Far from that. In fact, to the contrary. They have come together. You can feel the energy in the ear of them all uniting together. And while it's a painful situation, understanding that they will prevail. You could see it in all of their eyes. With every single person that I met, with every single soldier that I met and bumped into and spoke with every single politician that we met with, it was all the same thing. An unmitigated belief, connection, and unity that everyone is committed to, and knowing and believing that the Jewish people are only going to become stronger. That's it. They're only going to become stronger. I want to thank you all for listening to this podcast. Definitely a crazy time in this world. There's a lot of things that could be done, both small, both big, but small is really the answer. Because most of us think that if we can't do something big, we shouldn't do it at all. 1 parak of Tehillim, 1 chapter of Psalms, for those listening, is something. $1 given to an Israeli soldier is something. And we all have the ability to do those small things. So don't think you have to do something big. I want to thank all you all for watching. Episode number 3 next week. Thanks so much.